Hey everybody, this is Christian, and last week we covered some of the new and cool features in Teleport 13. Remember, this is the free and open source identity proxy that you can use to securely authenticate to your home lab or IT infrastructure and manage applications, Linux servers, Kubernetes, and yeah, many other resources. Today I want to expand on this and walk you through the deployment of a new Teleport instance and how that's going to work with a Traefik reverse proxy to securely expose this application with trusted TLS certificates. So I hope that's going to be helpful for you if you want to know how to securely authenticate to your infrastructure using Teleport. So without any further discussion, let's jump right into it. Okay, so before we start, I just want to say if you never heard about Traefik before, if you don't know about reverse proxies, Docker and so on, then you probably should check out some of my older videos because there I've covered it in much more detail. Today we will mainly focus on the deployment side and I want to keep it very simple, so I'm not going over all of the details of the Traefik reverse proxy. I will link you a related video in the description that you can check out, but if you are familiar with that and how TLS works in general, I think this will be pretty straightforward for you. I also want to say that both Traefik and Teleport have some good documentation on how to set up all of this stuff, but if you want to keep it simple and if you don't want to start from scratch, then you can also check out my boilerplates repository on GitHub. So there I'm managing my template collection for various types of deployments. We will go into Docker Compose folder, and here I have created two separate projects, one for Teleport and one for Traefik. So we will first start with connecting to one of my remote servers, and I'm going to create a new folder here for our project that is called Teleport Demo 1. And I'm also going to create another project folder that we are using for Traefik. So we will need both of these folders, and they will contain separate Docker Compose files for each of these services. And I'm going to start with the deployment of the Traefik reverse proxy because that's what we're going to need first, and it should be working before we start deploying Teleport. So as with all of the Docker projects, I'm going to start with a new Docker Compose file, and I'm going back to my Git repository. I'm grabbing all of this stuff here and basically copy and paste it into my project folder. As I said, if you want to have a more in-depth explanation about Traefik, I'm going to make separate videos about that, and I'm also going to link you all the resources that I've created before. First of all, because we want to connect those two services in an easy way, it's always good to create a new Docker network on your Linux server that both of these Docker projects are attached to, because otherwise, if you're just using the Docker default network, I've explained this in my Docker networking tutorial, then each Docker Compose file would create a separate Docker network, and those two projects wouldn't be able to talk to each other. So let's do this and create a new network. I will just call this front end, hit enter, and then you should see your custom network. And then in the Docker Compose file, we need to uncomment this line, replace your Traefik network with the name of the network that you have created, in my case front end. Make sure it's external true, otherwise this Docker Compose project would try to create this network which is already existing. So with the external true statement, you make sure that an already created network is not tried to create again, it's just attached to this Docker Compose project. And then we're going to create a new service for the Traefik reverse proxy. I'm going to set it to the container name Traefik, and I'm using the latest Traefik image that was released at the time of the recording. Of course, you can also switch to an updated version of Traefik if you want. And we should also expose both of the ports here, the port 80 for HTTP protocol and HTTPS for HTTPS protocol. What we also need is this volume mount pointer here. We start creating a config directory so we can add a new folder where we later will store the Traefik configuration, and this will be mounted into the etc. Traefik path into the containers file system so Traefik can access this, and it's persistently stored on the host operating system. You also need to give Traefik access to the Docker socket, so otherwise it can't automatically expose any containers dynamically using the label, so that is also important. And because we also want to use Cloudflare as a certificate resolver, we also need to uncomment this line here to add an environment variable that is called CFDNS API token. If you're using a different DNS provider, you're not using Cloudflare, you can also go into the Traefik documentation. So here you can get a list of all the different providers that Traefik reverse proxy currently supports. I'm pretty sure you're finding one of the DNS providers in that list here that you want to use. I'm going to use Cloudflare, so we need to pass in this environment variable into the container. So this obviously you should replace with your Cloudflare API token. If you're not sure how to create this, you simply log into Cloudflare, open your profile section, and then in the left menu, you will find a button that's called API tokens. Click on create token, and you can use the added DNS zone template if you want to authenticate that API token for all your DNS zones, or you can also select one of your specific DNS zones. And then I'm continuing to summary. Let's create this token, copy this value, and paste it in my environment variable. Of course, we also need to uncomment this line here to attach the Traefik Docker container to the front-end network. That's everything we need for the Docker Compose file. Of course, we also need to configure Traefik, because this usually will just create a simple Traefik container, but it doesn't know how to issue certificates. It doesn't have a general configuration. So that's why we are creating a new file that is called traefik.yaml. And yeah, just like with the Docker Compose file, I'm not starting from scratch. I'm going back to my boilerplates file. And here you will also find a configuration template for the Traefik file. Let's copy all of this stuff, paste it into my config file on the remote server, and then I'm going through some of this section. Again, I'm not making this a full-blown Traefik tutorial. That's a topic for another video. But just to mention, you can also change anything in this configuration file, like changing the log levels, enable access logging if you want to do that, dashboard, and so on. You can also change some of the entry point configuration. I would definitely recommend you to do this here and redirect all the HTTP traffic to the secure HTTPS entry point, because otherwise it might be possible that traffic will expose HTTP services, and that's not what we want to do, especially for authentication stuff and so on. We always want to encrypt the traffic, of course, using the HTTPS protocol, so why not redirect everything automatically? And yeah, then we can start configuring our certificate resolver. So in my old tutorials, we have always used the HTTP challenge, but I would definitely recommend you to use a DNS challenge to issue certificates from your provider, because that's going to be a lot easier. And you only have the possibility to issue wildcard certificates that will be valid for all the subdomains that we're using later in Teleport. That's why we're going to need a DNS challenge. You can also start with uncommenting this line, and then you can select if you want to use the staging template or the production template. The difference of both is that with the staging certificate resolver, that's using a different CA server from Letsencrypt, and these certificates won't be valid, but you will be able to test it. If you're not sure how to use it, I would definitely start getting the staging certificate resolver working, because you might run into any issues that you need to fix later. But in my case, I'm pretty optimistic, so I'm going to use the production template. Of course, we need to remove this section here because we are not going to use an HTTP challenge, and we also need to enter the email address. So I'm just going to use the info address of my domain that I'm going to use for the TLS certificates. Then you also need to add your provider. Again, I'm going to use the Cloudflare provider, of course. What we also need to do is we need to uncomment this line here. So this is going to disable the TLS verification check on Traefik itself if you need to expose any HTTPS services internally that use self-signed certificates. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you deploy Teleport, it's going to issue self-signed certificates that are not valid publicly. And usually by default, Traefik will check these certificates if they are valid. And if they are not, you will get an internal server error if you try to expose these HTTPS services with untrusted TLS certificates. But that's not going to be an issue because we don't want to access Teleport directly. We want to expose it with Traefik. It's not a big deal if the internal HTTPS certificates of Teleport aren't trusted, and we just need to disable this step, or we need to skip this verification step. And you can also set some specific TLS settings. I'm not going over these, and also the other provider settings are totally fine. So we can basically start deploying this now. So what I will do is I will switch back to my terminal, and I will go into the Traefik Demo 1 project. So hopefully I've done everything right, but we will find out. Let's execute a Docker Compose up. First, let's run it in the foreground to see if I've made any mistakes to the configuration. Okay, so as I knew I would get an error. So sometimes this error happens if you don't create this folder here in the config file first. So let's stop this for a second. Go into the config folder and let's just create a new folder for the certificates. Now it should be working. So you can see the configuration is loaded and the Traefik reverse proxy is up and running. Let's fire up a new console and test if I can reach this service. So you can see I'm getting moved permanently. So this is to check if the redirection from HTTP to HTTPS works. So let's try to open the HTTP website. You can see this, of course, gets a TLS certificate error because it's using the Traefik's default internal TLS certificate. It only starts issuing new certificates once you start exposing any applications or services using Traefik. Okay, but that's good. Yeah, Traefik should be running. We can now stop the container and run it in the background with a -d parameter. So now we can check docker compose ps to see the container is up and running. It does its thing in the background. We can now start deploying the teleport container. I'm going to open this in VS Code as well. So this is where we can start adding our second docker compose file. Go into the teleport folder and copy everything. Okay, great. So because we're using Traefik and we want to connect those two containers to the same Docker network, we need to, of course, uncomment this section again and rename this with front end. And then we're going to start creating a new teleport container using this image here. So that's using the latest version, teleport 13. I'm going to set the container name to teleport, of course. And if you just deploy a teleport instance without a reverse proxy, you will need to expose all of these ports here. But because we're using Traefik as a load balancer / reverse proxy in front of teleport, we don't need to expose these containers directly anymore. So we can just remove this section here. We just need to make sure that we are mounting those two folders into the container. So we need to create a new config folder. This is where we can add our teleport config later. And we also need to create a data folder that is for storing the persistent data of teleport, something like, yeah, the audit logging or the session recordings and so on. And yeah, we also want to use Traefik, so we're going to uncomment all these lines here as well. I know these are a lot of labels that we need to add to our container to make this work, but don't worry, I will go through all of this in a second. I'm just going to uncomment this network here as well. And yeah, so that's basically what you need to do to make this working in Traefik. So one thing that is pretty important is if you don't expose all of the Docker containers by default, which I have told you not to do, you need to add this label here to enable Traefik to expose this Docker container. And what we also need to make sure is that we configure the port and the protocol what Traefik needs to expose. And we also want to create two routers here. We're going to create one HTTP router and one HTTPS router. So these first two lines here are always the same for both routers. That will make sure that we're selecting the entry point here, and we create a new rule that is listening on a host regular expression. In the past, I've always used just the host and then the simple server URL. So it has looked something like this here, pretty simple, but that's not going to work in combination with the Teleport app service, because the app service of Teleport is using a subdomain in front of the usual server URL. So that's why we also need to add this regular expression to not just pick up and forward requests to the Teleport URL, but also to all the subdomains that could be in front of the server URL. And what we also need to make sure, of course, is that we replace this placeholder, your server URL, with the server URL, yeah, that you're going to use for Teleport. So I've explained this in a bit more detail in my DNS server video. What I've done is in my internal network, I have created a rule that is forwarding all requests to the SRV demo 5 home.creative.de here to the internal IP address of that particular server. So on my internal DNS server config, you can see I've created DNS records for all of these different entries here in the domain home.creative.de. So I'm going to add a new wildcard for srv demo5.home.creative.de. Add the asterisk, so that matches anything, to the same IP address as the srv demo5 server. Going to need to restart the DNS server. This should now resolve anything in front of this srv demo5 server to this internal IP address. So I'm going to use just the name teleport demo1 in front of that. And if we would have a subdomain for some of the application services later, maybe test app dot, that should always resolve to this internal IP address. So that's what we're going to use. We are going to use this DNS name here, add it, change the value of the placeholder, and then it's also important to add these lines here. We need to change our certificate resolver, otherwise Traefik doesn't know which cert resolver to use to issue the trusted TLS certificate. Let me quickly go back. I just can't remember what was the name. I think I've just named it production. Okay, so that always needs to match this name here. Production. And these other two lines, that makes sure that Traefik issues a wildcard certificate for this domain as well. So yeah, just to make sure that this certificate is not just valid for this Teleport servers, but also all the other subdomains for the app servers of Teleport. Okay, great. So that's it about the Docker Compose. Now we need to create the Teleport config file. I'm going to go back to my project. I'm going to grab this example file. So this is just a basic Teleport template that I've created to deploy a new Teleport instance. There are just a few things that need to be changed. First, the server name, which should be Teleport Demo 1. So I'm not going over any of the specifics here, like passwordless authentication, Teleport Assist. Again, I've done this in some of my older videos. If you want to know how to use passwordless authentication, go check out this video. The other one was about the Teleport Assist and other features. Going to link that in the description as well. We don't need the SSH service on this instance. Don't worry, you can later add any other remote resources to this Teleport instance, so don't worry about this. This would just if you want to create a new node into the containers shell. No, we don't need that. But we need to add the proxy service here. The web listener address is 3080. And because we're using a reverse proxy, we also need to change the public address of Teleport and change it to the port 443, because that's very important. Teleport's internal HTTPS service with self-signed certificates is using this port internally, but to any external client, we want to expose this using Traefik, and of course we don't want to use this port here externally. Externally, it should be the standard port for HTTPS, which is 443. So that's why we need to tell Teleport, hey, if you want to make any redirects, it should be redirected to the address of where Traefik picks it up. Okay, great. So now we have everything. I hope everything is working, so we can go back to my server and just hit a Docker Compose up in the foreground. Let's see if that runs. That looks all good. I'm going to access my Teleport demo URL on the server demo 5. And yeah, we can now start using Teleport. If you're entirely new to Teleport, I just want to quickly show you what you need to do now, because now you need to create a user first to be able to authenticate. So let's go back here. I'm just restarting the Teleport servers in the background, so that should be fine. And now we need to add a user using the administrative shell of the Teleport service. And you can invoke any commands into the containers file system or into the containers shell by using the Docker Compose exec command, and just name the container that should be Teleport. And then we need to add the command that should be executed. So this executes the tctl command in the container of Teleport. And you can see this is the admin tool for the Teleport access platform. You can create users, you can update users, you can remove users, you can add tokens, you can authenticate new resources, and so on. I've explained some of this stuff in my older videos. I'm not going through this detail. By the way, if you want to see the walkthrough of some of the Teleport services to add remote servers and so on, yeah, I'm open for any tutorials, so please leave me a comment. And by the way, you should also give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see that, so that would be really amazing. Okay, so now we need to create a new user here. So let's go use the users command. Let's add a new user that is called xstat. And yeah, let's just hit enter. So I also need to add a role to this user. Roles is editor. And now we need to set up our credentials here. So we need to follow this link here, open it in the browser, and that should walk you through the onboarding process of creating a new user. So that's our Teleport instance. This is where we can manage our remote servers or remote applications. We haven't added any of these yet. So I just quickly want to demonstrate how that's working. This should not be a deep dive tutorial of all the features in Teleport, because that would probably take a few hours. But just to add a simple application, if you want to, for example, if you want to expose like an administrative service, like my Proxmox server that is running on my internal network. So let's go back into the configuration file of Teleport. I've already prepared a section for the app service in here, but it's not enabled yet. So let's do this. Let's enable the app service on our Teleport instance. If you usually would deploy Teleport in a cloud environment, for example, that would be different, of course, because then you would usually add this configuration not to the cloud instance, but to a Teleport node that is running inside your remote network. So the point where the app service is deployed and where you want to access your application, that should be able to reach this target, right? So let's enable this. It's very important that you use the correct formatting for the app service. I've had a case on our Discord server where somebody used numbers in here or a dash inside the app service name, something like Proxmox. I usually deploy my resources like this. For example, I always use Proxmox prot -2 or something like this. This is not working. And I don't know if it's bug in Teleport or if this is against their app service name encodings, whatever it is, but you can't use numbers and you can't use any symbols. You just can use names, right? So if you have a different Proxmox servers, you need to name them something like Proxmox 2 or Proxmox 1. I know it's a bit inconvenient, so maybe they're going to fix that in an upcoming version, but just don't use numbers in here, okay? So let's call it Proxmox just for testing. And then we, of course, need to give it the URI for the target application. So on my case, this is, and here you can use any IP address, you can use DNS names. As you know, I have DNS names for all of this stuff here. So this is the location of my Proxmox web UI. And you can also add this line here, insecure skip verify, if you're using self-signed certificates or untrusted TLS certificates in your internal services, then you can add this to true, and then Teleport won't verify the TLS certificate if that's an HTTPS protocol of your internal services. Okay, let's quickly just restart the Teleport service. You will notice that you don't see the resource here, and that's probably the case because I haven't really edited the role correctly, so I need to add the access role to my user and the auditor role to add all the permissions that are necessary. We need to log out and log in again. Go into the application settings, and then you can see there's a new entry that should securely authenticate us to the Proxmox application or the Proxmox web interface in my internal network. You can use this to securely administrate your internal services. You click on launch, and this will add a redirection. You can see this is my Proxmox web UI, and just as simple as that, you can do that with any other application servers. You can add all your services to this configuration file, and then you can use it to securely authenticate from any other location to your Teleport proxy servers, and from there to your internal web applications. Of course, you can also add any of the other resources, Kubernetes, servers, databases. You just need to go to management, enroll new resources, and see what's all possible. So I hope this helped you to set up Teleport on your home lab and IT infrastructure. Please tell me in the comments if you would like to see more tutorials about this, or if you want to have a specific tutorial about any technical topic you want to know. Join our Discord and let me know. Let's have a chat about this. And as always, thanks everybody for watching. I will catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.